Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2019 AWS Public Sector Summit in Washington, D.C. My name is Shalisa Chambliss, and I will be your room host today. I just have a couple of quick announcements before I get off the stage. I want to make sure that everyone has downloaded the AWS Americas Events app. This is where you can create your schedule, engage with the summit, and get important notifications. It's also where you can complete your surveys on all of the sessions that you attend today. We really want to collect that information. If you are an iOS user, the app is available in the App Store. For Android users, you can get the app as a web download, or the Q code reader is just out of this door to your left. Please note that all sessions are being recorded today, so if you would just take a moment to silence all of your devices, that would be really great. This session is titled, in your app or on your schedule, Strategies for Enterprise Cloud Brokerage on AWS. And we'd like to welcome from GDIT to the stage Neil Cronimus, Senior Director of Cloud, Matt McFadden, Senior Director of Cyber, and Samir Ramchandani, AWS Alliance Manager. Thank you.
Hi, good morning all. Firstly, there's lots of seats in the front. We have some exciting content, so please come up front if for those that are coming in late. Thank you for being here and welcome to your first day of the AWS Public Sector Summit. Like I was introduced, I am Samir Ramchandani with GDIT. I manage our strategic alliance and partnership with AWS. And we have some exciting topics to share with you today, mainly best practices, lessons learned, sort of our first-hand view of working with the government when it comes to delivering AWS at scale, and also providing cloud brokerages, enterprise cloud brokerages, and security solutions and services. So over the past decade or so, or at least the past several years that AWS has been around, pervasive in the government space, we've seen a widespread adoption of AWS. And in the government side, we've actually seen a really radical change of thinking in terms of policy making from a cloud first to a cloud smart policy. We're really now focused in an area where the mission owner is really the focus. We're really focused on enabling the mission owner, the business owner of the applications, modernizing the business application infrastructure, and really having laser focus when it comes to security, when it comes to compliance, when it comes to enabling the workforce, and also when it comes to really working with the government and operationalizing efficient procurement practices. Well, that's exactly what GDIT is doing. And this is across our numerous cloud BPA contracts, our government contract vehicles. Today in our session, over the next 50 minutes, we're going to talk to you about what are the key tenets of cloud brokerage. We're going to walk you through some of those best practices and stories. We're going to talk a lot about what brokerage means in the government. No single brokerage is the same as the other. There's always the no size fits all, no one size fits all, and cloud brokerages really fall there. There's multiple models of cloud brokerages that we have implemented and seen the government on AWS. At the enterprise level, you have decentralized cloud brokerages. You have a centralized sort of a cloud owner or a sort of a service owner that really owns the brokerage, that would run the brokerage for the mission owners, or ones that are more federated, where the actual mission owner has a lot more control on the use and the delivery and the service management of AWS solutions in their cloud infrastructure. Cybersecurity is really at the heart of what we do on AWS. Our GDIT Cyber Stack is an enterprise view of how we deliver cyber solutions on AWS. We're going to talk a lot about some of those details and how we've built our Cyber Stack natively on AWS, leveraging AWS native services. We're going to show those to you. We're going to talk about some of those integration points. And again, this is a learning session. And we also want to hear from you. We want to hear from you in terms of your environments, your questions, and really make this a sort of a two-way street in terms of speaking points. So this is not meant to be an eye chart. It is GDIT by the numbers. We really deliver cloud at scale. There's about 35,000 of us, and with over $9 billion in revenues, we are dedicated to supporting the government. When I say that we're delivering cloud at scale on AWS across our customer base includes federal health, civilian, intelligence agencies, defense agencies, DHS, the State Department, several state and local agencies. GDIT is a AWS Premier Partner, and we have several AWS competencies, as you can see there. We have a government competency, we have a managed services competency, we have a gov delivery competency, and most recently, we also got our well-architected competency on AWS. When we talk about delivering cloud at scale on AWS, think about managing over 50,000 EC2 instances across a wide variety of customers. We manage over 20 enterprise cloud brokerage programs on AWS currently, and that number is growing. One of our customers has over 2,000 AWS accounts. And yes, it's one enterprise customer that has over 2,000 AWS accounts. You cannot even imagine the kind of billing data and the amount of logging and the reporting and the IAM policies and security groups that we have to keep everything intact to make everything work on a daily basis. That's the scale that we're delivering AWS solutions. Another customer has over 1,000 VPCs at this point as part of their networking infrastructure in AWS, and that is growing by leaps and bounds. As we see that scale, I'm really excited to introduce two of my colleagues to share some of those best practices and stories with you in this learning session. Neil Cronimus, better known as our Professor of Cloud, is the lead of our cloud practice, as well as sets the direction for our cloud solutions on AWS. He's going to talk to you about a lot of those best practices that I spoke about in cloud brokerage. What do those really mean to the government? And when it comes to cloud smart policies. Next, we're going to have Dr. Matt McFadden, who is our cyber director, and he leads our Cyber Center of Excellence. He's going to talk to you a lot about what the cyber stack means, whether it is your data or it's traffic that traverses the TIC or the cloud access point. You really need to deliver the right levels of encryption. You really need to deliver the right levels of logging and reporting and monitoring. And our cyber stack is just one way that we are providing that enterprise capability to the mission owner, to the government at scale. We're leveraging a lot of AWS solutions and services in our cyber stack. Our cyber stack is built on the AWS GovCloud region, so we're going to talk to you a lot about that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Neil.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. And like I said, my name is Neil Cronimus. I lead our Cloud Center of Excellence and our cloud strategy for the company. And before I get started, I want to kind of take a step back and talk about how did we come up with this topic? Because you heard Samir talk about a lot of the stuff we do, and when we were brainstorming, trying to figure out what's a good topic to talk here, brokerage came up. And the one that caught my attention was what Samir talked about, was that 2,000 instances. We have one customer with 2,000 accounts. It has over 20,000 VMs. They're using RDS. They're using every single service imaginable in that. And how do you manage all that when it's such a large scale? We have another client with over 250 AWS accounts. They're all in on AWS, tens of thousands of VMs there as well. And how do you take the business and the technical side together? And that's where we came up with this, is we can do brokerage because trying to manage that is very difficult. Whether I'm on the business side with the costing, whether I'm on the technical side of keeping all the identity and access management all together, it's very difficult. So that's where we came up with this topic. So what do? There's 4 tenets that we've come up with. We looked across, Samir mentioned 30 plus different cloud brokerages that we're doing today. And we looked for that commonality. What do we see across all of them on AWS? And it's these 4: governance, brokerage, automation, and security. And those are the 4 key tenets. Because what are we trying to do for our customers? We're trying to make things simple, easy for the users, reduce that risk, and make sure the security is there to prevent data leakage or spillage. That's what we're trying to do here. If we look at governance for a second, what do we look at governance? We're looking at the policy and compliance issues. We're looking at cost optimization, and we're looking at SLAs. When you're looking at compliance, we got to have some type of policy enforcement. How are we going to make sure the policies are there, that governance, that workflow for when someone orders those services and stuff? Because the government wants to have those checkpoints. It's got to go through an ICCB or some other type of policy thing. Whether you're using an internal cloud native tool or a third-party tool, you got to have that workflow, that governance to make sure that person can order those services. The other thing, biggest thing in our opinion, is the cost. How do I manage that? Go back to that 2,000 accounts. That means I get 2,000 separate bills from AWS that I have to put together, compile, and figure out who did what and how to do the right chargeback and everything for our clients. So that's a very big task there. That's where you have to have some type of cost optimization tool to help you with that. And there's a number of tools out there that can help you. So look into those things, not just from the billing aspect, but also from an optimization, because they can look and see where you can save money. Or maybe you're out of compliance. So take a look there and make sure you're doing there. And then SLAs. All the agencies have to track their SLAs, whether they're in the data center, the cloud, or wherever. Some agencies have SLA management tools, some don't. But if you do, integrate it. Make sure it's all together so it's one view. You got to have that unified view. And when you're doing the governance, especially from a business side, you got to have that workflow, that process to make sure the services get rendered to the right people, to that right account. If you don't, like I said, 2,000 accounts, they could easily get put into the wrong account. So you got to make sure that gets there. For brokerage, you got to make it simple. Okay, because what are we doing? We're provisioning services. Yes, I can go to the AWS console and stuff, but if I'm trying to keep track of who's doing what, I need some type of governance with the brokerage model to provision that. And so that means coming up with a service catalog and making sure that service catalog ideally is not just doing AWS, but in a true hybrid, I can also hit my legacy data center as well. So making sure you get both of those. You've got to have dashboarding and reporting. It's got to be canned reports that are tied to the product owners or the line of business, but be able to do ad hoc as well. Without that ad hoc piece, you're gonna be getting requests all the time from this user or that user. I need this report, I need that report. So having that ad hoc capability is very critical, or you're gonna spend a lot of time doing reports. And then the self-service. You got to be self-service, but you don't want them calling up the help desk or the service desk, creating a ticket and doing that. That's the old school way of doing it. Cloud is about self-service. But make sure that self-service is a simplified portal. You want to make sure that portal is easy to use and easy to understand. Because guess what? If you make it complicated and it takes 50 million clicks to do something, users aren't going to use it. They're going to go find some other way. Next thing you know, you got rogue AWS accounts all over the place. So it's got to be a simple interface. Automation. Think about this. I have 2,000 accounts, 40+ thousand VMs sitting in this customer's environment. If I don't automate things, I'm going to have a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, and that's not what I want, because the more I have manual intervention, the more chance of errors. Not because people try, but hey, it's easy to fat finger things. So automate where you can. From a configuration, just because you get compliance with the security patching updates. Also, integration. Think about when I spin up a service and I have a CMDB. I got to keep track of the service. I got to have that inventory integrated into, whether it's something like a ServiceNow or Surewell, a BMC tool, whatever that CMD of record is, so you have that tracking capability. That helps with the configuration management. The other thing you have is, with capacity and resources, is tagging. You've got to have a tagging structure. Without a tagging structure, you really don't know who's doing what, and you need to standardize that. And that's got to be across all the accounts, because that's also plays importance to your cost. When a bill comes in without the tagging, you really don't know which cost is which. And I don't know if you guys seen the AWS account numbers and stuff. I don't know what that account number means, do you? So make sure that you have the tagging structure and it's set for everything. That goes back to the governance piece. Make sure the governance piece, when I'm provisioning services, have those tagging rules set in place so I can't provision a service without tagging. If you notice, all these are intertwined, everything I've done here. Finally, security. Identity access management. If I have 2,000 accounts and imagine how many users I have in 2,000 accounts. That's a lot of users. I got to be able to keep track of what that is. You got to have multi-factor authentication from that standpoint, so you're keeping you're keeping the wrong users out. The other thing is, and is weird, but a cloud access security broker. Third-party tool, okay? Keep it from an independent auditor standpoint. Yes, I'm only doing AWS, but think about it. With 2,000 accounts, how can I ensure that person is what they say there is? It just gives the government a different viewpoint from an independent third-party choice and not just relying all cloud-native tools. Then monitoring and management. Another key tenet here. If you don't, my motto is what gets measured gets done. If I'm not measuring it, if I'm not monitoring it, I don't know if it's getting done. So make sure you're using cloud-native tools. Make sure you're using integration with your own enterprise tools that you already made investments in. If they're not ready, maybe it's time to look for a refresh, or maybe there's just an upgrade you need to do on your current enterprise tool, but reutilize your investments you've already made. With that, what I'd like to do is bring up Dr. Matt McFadden, who's going to talk about more in depth around security.
Alrighty. Thanks, Neil.
Okay, thanks.
Alrighty, good morning. I think that was loud enough. All right, let me click through. So any cyber professionals in the audience? A few. All right, watch out for those folks. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about cyber and what does that mean from cloud brokerage. Many of my colleagues here have talked about, we do brokerage from a few workloads to 50,000 workloads. At the end of the day, you have to have a similar capable cyber capability. And we're going to talk about kind of what that means and what is a strategy around that. So if you didn't know about GDIT, we're one of the largest integrators that, we do cyber to mission and IT at scale. We have one of the largest cyber workforces. We deliver security operations to some of the largest government customers out there. We have 10 plus SOCs, various agencies. But one of the main things that are in common is that all these agencies are moving to the cloud. So we have to have a cyber strategy that adapts to a cloud environment, a hybrid environment, on-prem, off-prem, containerization, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about is the strategy behind that. All right, next slide. So what are we looking at for tomorrow, right? What is the future looking like? As part of this threat landscape, we have lots of different cloud technologies. The perimeter is constantly changing. And what that means is we have to make sure that we have the right cyber capabilities to adapt to that perimeter. We can't just take those traditional on-premise tools, move them to the cloud, and expect them to work the same way. And there's a strategy behind that. We want to use some of the cloud-native functionality. We want to provide that increased situational awareness, but we also want to kind of glean the benefits of moving to the cloud. As with everything that we face every day, there's always emerging threats. The next 0 day, as those threats increase, we have to focus more from protection into more prevention. How are we preventing those 0 days attacks? And then from a prevention standpoint, there's certain technologies that we're looking to be more adapted with our cyber defense. So using signatureless tools, using AI, machine learning, using something called SOAR. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. All right, next slide here. So just to set some context, I was at reInvent, I think about a year or two ago, and Stephen Schmidt, their CISO, had a question, and I thought he phrased it as, well, how many people do you think is in our SOC? And I was like, that's a really good question. And basically the answer was 1, the person on call. I thought that was pretty funny, but the context around that is a lot of their strategy is driven around automation. And when you're someone like AWS and you're scaling to many of these various workloads and users, obviously automation is critical for how you secure your perimeter. And I thought that was very eye-opening, and I think that was very directly aligned with many of the things that we're doing for many of our customers from a brokerage standpoint. The more that we can automate and integrate our services, the better that can scale to meet our customers' needs. So over to this slide, we look at cloud acceleration and the cyber threat. There's so many threats out there, there's so much data, there's so many different cyber tools, there's a problem. So a lot of what we're trying to do is maximize the effectiveness of our cyber defense capabilities. We have all these tools. We go into some organizations, they have somewhere between 50 and 150 tools. Well, there's kind of that team component and skill sets in the workforce. How can you be effective when you have 150 different cyber tools to manage? So the more that we can streamline that, the better. But it's all about how do we reduce the time to respond. In some organizations, think a large-scale enterprise, the concept of just putting a block rule for a firewall is a very, very manual process. An operator might see an event, and if they log in their CDMDB, make a ticket, send that over to the network ops team. The network ops team has to pick up the ticket. And long story short, it's a week before we have a block rule for that adversary. So the more that we can streamline that process, and there's the business process piece for that, the better. But ultimately, moving into the cloud, it's more than just the EC2 workloads. AWS has some very, very powerful cyber tools within their environment. So we want to leverage as many of those native ones as possible. Back to those challenges: too many tools, lack of integration, not a lot of automation, hybrid complexity, on-prem. There's a resource problem. We don't always have enough cyber professionals, and we don't want to focus as much on tools and technologies as more as the capabilities. So I think take a minute and look at this topology here, or chart. This is the reality of what we're doing every day, and not necessarily moving to the cloud doesn't necessarily underplay that, but ultimately, when we talk cyber, we're talking about protecting data. And when we're protecting data, think about all the things that we have to do: governance, role-based access, cyber analytics, patching, DevSecOps, risk management, supply chain. Hard challenge. Then our data, they're across mission systems, IT systems, platform. We have the wonderful insider threat that we're protecting against. Yet we have all these various threats out there, whether it's a buffer overflow, a SQL injection, spear phishing, malware. The cloud helps us drive a strategy to be more effective against doing this stuff, but it's still very important. So if I look at kind of the 4 things that we're trying to do as part of that strategy: 1, we have to have an effective cyber workforce. It's not just the tools, it's the operators and analysts using them day to day. We have to have effective cyber ops. Very, very important when we scale to those 50,000 workloads. We have to have enhanced cyber tools, and we have to limit our attack service. And that's why automation and configuration management is very important. All right, next slide. So if I were to look at some of our most mature customers, using the cloud, there's some traits. And the first thing I would say is know what you have. Focus on enhanced situational awareness. You can't defend what you don't know you have. So, good example is, if you're a customer agency and you have all these disparate accounts and, they're part of your organization, but you have no visibility, no security tools, no registration process, no governance around that, well, it's going to be very hard to secure that environment. The second thing is building resilience early. And I think with some of the recent changes with the NIST risk management framework updates and the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's all about building resilience. The more that we can build it correctly from the ground up, the better it is for our brokerage, our mission owners. And then lastly, we really have to standardize on a core set of tools and focus on that threat prevention. The more tools that we bring into the environment, the various environments, not having that situational awareness, it drives that complexity. And the one thing I always really try to highlight is adversaries thrive in complexity. And we see that many times when we read about a breach in the news, some type of misconfiguration, and many times that's because the environment's so complex, we just don't have the visibility to really manage it correctly. All right, next slide here. All right, so as part of that strategy, we developed something called the GDIT cyber stack. And it's kind of a use case for us to help develop that modular ecosystem that fits around those various strategy components. So if you're familiar, I think about a year ago, DISA created something called the Secure Cloud Computing Architecture, or SCCA. And the goal behind the SCCA was to develop a set of functional criteria of capabilities that a security stack must have. It doesn't define technologies, but a capability. Very, very important. The great thing about that is, we can take that on-premise in a customer environment, in the cloud, and we have a common set of capabilities that we know we need to perform. So what we did was we worked to develop an implementation in AWS GovCloud, but at the same time, we want to leverage a lot of the native security services that are available. But this wasn't just limited to DoD or DISA. We wanted to develop a level set of capabilities that we could take to any agency, whether federal, DHS, you name it. And then we wanted to focus around those kind of key tenets of automation and orchestration so we could scale to meet any needs available. All right. So what does this all mean? So we basically built an SCCA suite that includes some of the cloud access points, the security stack, the managed services, and the credential manager. And we've worked to develop a kind of a security plan that aligns to that functional requirement document with those technical capabilities. And it aligns to the DoD Cloud FRD. One of the goals around it is when you're talking brokerage, you don't want to recreate this for every single mission owner. We want to build it once, and we want to have one cyber platform that they can inherit. And that's very, very important from an assessment and accreditation standpoint. So we want folks to kind of onboard into an environment, and they have that similar level of cyber capability. And we want to leverage some of the other capabilities like CASB. And the other thing is we're really trying to work to drive down cost. Have a minimal set of tools, but use them most effectively. And we've worked with a lot of our partners to really optimize how that works within AWS. And working with Neil in our Cloud Center of Excellence, we help define a lot of the best practices around configuration and how to deploy this. All right, next slide here. So I bet you're asking, what are these great stack capabilities? Well, a lot of these align within the VDMS and the VDSS. So we have network security, so we provide intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. Reverse proxying is very important, so we have to provide web application traffic inspection. Full packet capture is part of the FRD requirement. You have to capture and store network traffic. So if we need to perform some type of cyber analytics, we can do that. SSL inspections. So obviously with many applications, there is a secure SSL encryption that we need to break and inspect, so we have visibility. We have logging, event management, and security analysis via SIEM. We do endpoint protection. So how do we take that stack and make it visible down to the client and the endpoint? We do vulnerability scanning, orchestration, and SOAR. So one of the key components here is orchestration and SOAR. So last year, I want to say, Gartner coined the term SOAR. And if you're not familiar with SOAR, that stands for Security, Orchestration, Automation, and Response. And what that essentially is basically it's a tool that deploys that has access to the various security component APIs, and that allows you to automate many of the functions. One of the significant challenges of many SOCs is they spend too much time on triaging very, I want to say, trivial events. So think about every malicious spam email that you get. And they decide, that user decides to send it to the SOC. Well, we want to see if it's maybe a targeted adversary, but it takes time to maybe look up the IP address and is the attachment malicious. So the more that we can automate that, the kind of the trivial forensics that they would perform, the lot faster it is for SOCs to respond to the more meaningful things when there could be an incident compromise. So that's a concept, but the main point for us is we want to take many of these disparate tools and integrate them together as part of a dashboard that is kind of automated. So moving on here, we also have IDAM, which is important from identity access management, and then lastly, incident response. The traditional incident response capabilities that you're used to change a lot in the cloud. So, think about today. If you have a workload and that gets compromised, what is your process around that? So, you may take that and create a compromised security group. You have to take that virtual machine and allow that VM to have access to a set of security tools or incident response tools. So there's a lot of processes and other disparate tools that you have to set up to help respond to that. And that's one of the things that we're working to address. So, as part of those key features, we kind of look at 4 key tenets to help drive our stack. One, cybersecurity modernization. So we want to make sure we're using a lot of the latest tool sets, and we're kind of level setting the capabilities. So when we go into an environment or go into a customer, we want to ensure they map to those requirements and they can do those capabilities. If they can't, there's some deficiencies there that we need to drive. Second, automation. I think I'll probably say that another 5 times throughout this presentation here. But the more that we can streamline, not only our cyber operations, but how we do incident response, the better. I think for a lot of this stuff, it's also how do you drive to that outcome, right? So a lot of times that outcome is faster response times. And we want to have our, there's, especially in the DC area here, we hear 0% unemployment. We're trying to fill, I think, 3.5 million cyber jobs by, 2021. Well, guess what? Those talented cyber professionals are hard to come by. So we want to be as most effective as possible with our cyber workforce. And having a security stack like this helps drive that. From an orchestration standpoint, a lot of the technologies that we've chosen is really about open APIs, open access to the data. We want to be able for those tools to communicate together. And lastly, they need to have native cloud integration. And I think that's a challenge with some of the traditional tools out there as part of the current tool sets. So when we look at that governance model, think about the context. We're talking brokerage. And brokerage means a lot of things to a lot of folks, but I would say many times it's kind of operating an environment for multiple customers. I want to say multiple groups, maybe multiple agencies. But the point is, for us, is we want something that is inheritable and that those customers that are onboarding into the environment can use. And that way, it helps streamline the accreditation process, and it gives that level set for our customers. We have to have the ability to have a multiple delivery model. Every customer is different. Their data is everywhere. So we want to make sure that our stack is visible everywhere. And I think the main point is, we want it modular, right? So if a certain customer is very used to a certain technology, good example, maybe Elastic versus Splunk. We can begin to kind of take that technology out and leverage what that customer is used to. And that might be because, their cyber operators, have a mandate because of, US Cybercom, or, they've done a lot of investment into training and, using this tool set. So, things to consider. So on the next slide here, we talked through some of the AWS integration stuff. So, our kind of go-to is Splunk, and there's a couple components for Splunk. There's Splunk Enterprise with Splunk Enterprise Security with Phantom, and I think one of the benefits of Splunk is it's very easy to deploy, but they have a very large application base of integration. So it makes it very easy to plug into those other security tools and other environments, and especially in AWS, and you get that kind of common situational awareness and operation. And we also want to be able to integrate within some of the existing AWS tools. So how do we incorporate CloudTrail logs? How do we incorporate GuardDuty alerts? And I think the other thing is just, there's security of the workloads, but there's also the configuration and auditing and security management of actually the cloud environment. We want to make sure that things are configured appropriately. All right, moving on here. So if you're into diagrams, here's a good structure of how these components sit within the various components of the stack. So notice our cyber stack maps to SCCA. We have the data center management, which is security infrastructure, vulnerability scanning, log aggregation, and then you have some more of the security components. Some of the challenges are just making sure obviously your net flow and your data is traversing multiple segments, or if you have unique requirements for DMZ, or I think as Samir mentioned, you have a cloud access point cap or TIC requirements. Just requires some engineering to kind of figure out what's the best place to, inspect that data. I think a lot of our strategy has been around just not duplicating efforts. So if you're breaking, expecting, and scanning here, we're not going to do it 3 times down the stack. We want to make sure we're most as efficient as possible. All right, so if we go into some of the cloud native tools, AWS has a lot of great cloud tools out there. And we need to leverage them to the best of the ability. So this is a good slide that kind of showcases everything that AWS has to offer that we're trying to leverage as much as our cyber stack as possible. So there's AWS Artifact. AWS Artifact is a portal, and they give you access to many of the security and compliance documentation. So if you're trying to develop ATO, security accreditation, there's a lot of good documentation that you can use to inherit as part of your package. And they try to make it easy for you. The second one is AWS Firewall Manager. So a little bit different than the AWS Web Application Firewall. The Firewall Manager allows you to centrally configure and manage rules across disparate accounts and applications. So if you are a cloud broker, it's a very important tool for you to help streamline the process of putting out various signatures and making sure you're level setting those customers. The next thing, and I'll go into in a little bit more in depth, is Amazon GuardDuty. So GuardDuty is, I think it came out last year, is a managed threat detection service that provides you with a lot of good information on the type of threats accessing your environment to security configuration. And I'll show you some of the examples of that, but it's a very easy way to provide a capable level of security to your environment, and definitely worth using. The next is AWS GuardDuty. So GuardDuty is yet again another threat detection service, but mostly focused on the data. A lot of the stuff say within your S3 buckets. So, if it's really looking for that sensitive data, so if you may have, credit cards or publicly configured S3 buckets and, or keys and things that, you may not want access to the world, it'll help scan your data and identify what that is. Which one are we on? All right. Next, we have Amazon Inspector. So Inspector is a really great tool for that. I go back to that configuration management. So you have that automated security assessment. It constantly goes in and tells you where are you deficient in your configuration. So that could be everything from an IAM policy to security groups. And we will begin to really drive our implementation of that. All right, so moving on, we have AWS Key Management Service. Key Management Service is very important. Encryption keys. We want to make sure our stuff is encrypted. There's some of the challenges we've seen is, some customers like to provide their own keys, is where, some like to leverage HSM and key management. So I think the point there is it's a challenge with many times when we're onboarding mission owners, we want to make sure the mission owners are responsible for their own keys rather than us kind of manage them. But we want to provide an easy mechanism for do that. But the one thing I always talk about keys is don't forget to change your keys out regularly. A lot of times we just throw out keys and never change them and pass them all around and what are we doing? So make sure we change out those keys very regularly as part of policy. We look at so if we move down here, we look at the AWS Security Hub. So Security Hub gives you another comprehensive view of the high priority security alerts and compliance. So that's very important from a brokerage standpoint. We have AWS Shield, which is their distributed denial of service. So this is something that I think you already get as part of protection when you start using these services. That's not necessarily something you opt into. And then lastly, we have AWS Single Sign-On. So AWS has a great SSO service. And you can also integrate that with their AWS directory services to give a very streamlined account view to a lot of our brokerage. Managing accounts is critical for the security of your environment. And then lastly, we have AWS's application firewall. So their WAF protects from a lot of those common exploits, from SQL injection to making sure you have application availability. You can upload custom rules, and it protects you against a level set of common rules that you see. All right. So moving on here, so it's just an example just to show AWS GuardDuty. So that is the threat detection service. So many times, traditionally, we've taken the AWS CloudTrail and the Amazon VPC flow logs, we've put them into our SIEM, and we've had to do a lot of the analysis ourselves. Well, using GuardDuty, it allows us to basically automate that process, and they give you a very easy way to continuously analyze, detect threats, and then, most importantly, take action on those threats. What use is an alert if I can't actually do something with it? So we've been working to really kind of drive how we use this as a centerpiece of how we use our cyber stack. It's if you have access to AWS, I would spool up an instance and start looking at GuardDuty. I mean, you'll see scans almost instantly of people trying to take a look at your environment. All right, moving on here. So here's an example of for this, I think I spooled up a standard AWS image. I think it was Red Hat, and within a couple minutes, I had someone trying to brute force SSH on my environment. So just be mindful of that. Hopefully you have a good SSH strategy in place where you're using key management and you're not using password over standard text authentication. All right. So as I mentioned, going down into AWS Maisie. Maisie is a security service, uses machine learning, works to discover, classify, and protect sensitive data. So think about any, maybe we might have, PII, or we might have some type of spillage in an S3 bucket. Well, it's nice to know there's a kind of a secondary service that allows to look for that information and continuously monitors that data. And it does a really good job with kind of classifying that data. So, I mean, even from content type, file extensions, et cetera. So if you take a look, here are some examples. So we have a bunch of different indicators to look for. So it could be configuration compliance, anonymized access to a data type, maybe that public S3 bucket, open permissions, privilege escalation. So, and especially from a brokerage standpoint, you can set this up where you're looking for, across all your data source as part of that. Alrighty, well, that's all I got from a cyber perspective. So I think we have a few minutes left. I'm going to turn it over to Samir, and I think we're going to take some questions.
Please, anyone with questions, we do have a few minutes. We'd love to hear from you. There's a mic up front here if anyone wants to.
All right, don't be shy. I'm sure there's some questions in the back there. Oh, there's
yes, sir. Please.
So from a brokerage perspective, you're coming to a company and trying to explain to them the complexity. That's what you were talking about today. All these incredible tools, all the incredible tools that they have that you could use. How do you guys convey that?
That's a good question. Yes, so I think the question was, we talked about all these tools and all these complexities. How do you convey that, I guess, to the customer, correct?
Correct.
So, there's kind of the quantitative and the qualitative, right? The quantitative, I mean, you can show the number of workloads or, I think I can go back here, right? Look, just, I typically show them, there we go, hold on. Oop. There's your chart. So I think from from the brokerage perspective, there's the quantitative, the number of applications, the number of workloads, the number of users, the number of end clients. But at the same time, there's kind of all the operations that you have to do, and whether you have one workload or you have 50,000 workloads, I think you're still trying to protect that data. And if that data on one workload is vulnerable, you're still, could be breached, right? But I think where the risk comes in is that kind of likelihood. When you're scaling to those number of workloads, there's a much increased risk that, at least one of those are misconfigured, right? Or an attacker could get access to. So, I try to kind of look at it at those pillars. There's the technical piece, the operational piece, the management piece. I don't know if you have any insight.
No, it also depends on the tools. We've talked a lot about the AWS native services and tools that we leverage, but it also depends on the customer's environment. Matt has talked a lot about Splunk. We tend to go with a lot of the AWS native services to fulfill these functions, but we also want to make sure we're leveraging the licenses and the preferences that the customer has. If they've already bought an ELA or they have a huge license for some other tool that might not be in the stack, we would also consider those approaches. So we're not really wedded to the idea of just one set of tools. It's very modular. We slot in tools as they're fulfilling these different functions.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Well, it's really more or less from a brokerage standpoint, you guys, are saying this is brokerage, and you come in, you take a look, you analyze, you say, you've got a very complex environment. Here are your current tools. Here are the AWS tools. We don't even know some of the AWS tools that might be out in 6 months or a year. And the question is, well, where do you start? And so what I was really trying to say is, how do you convey that complexity and say, okay, start here?
Right.
So yeah, so just to clarify, right? So I kind of use our cyber stack as that benchmark. We know we have these capabilities, and if the mission owner or the customer wants to bring their own capability, that's fine, but we need to ensure that they're doing this capability. So there's kind of that, I want to say that oversight, but at the same time, why we've been so successful with brokerage is just a lot of times the customers are all over the place. I mean, reality, and a lot of the CISOs in the enterprise want to have a common understanding that at least we know those accounts are at the same level. So cool. Alrighty, any other questions out there? Saw that hand up first.
This will be our last one before break.
Hi, I'm from U.S. Cyber Command. One of the questions that I had was dealing with your cybersecurity stack. So when the purchase is made for that, can that be made dealing with just the system itself, or does that have to come with bodies, and does that come with training? Also, we use a proprietary ESM with ArcSight, and we're also on AWS as well, on all three fabrics. Do you guys also support dealing with the architecture of being on secret and TS? And obviously there's less tools within AWS as you go up the stack. So just wanted to get an understanding on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I could kind of streamline that into one word, flexible. So we know every mission owner has their own requirements, own needs, own tools. We've tried to make it easy with kind of streamlining the tools process, being that we have a lot of partner alliances. We really have driven down the cost efficiencies to many of those tools. And a lot of what we've tried to do is the integration pieces. So not to say in almost every deployment, we're leveraging some native tools as part of the organization. So obviously very familiar with ArcSight. So that's very common from a requirement standpoint.
Your other question was around the tools, the sort of the architecture, the capability, and also the bodies. And the answer is yes. We're a large systems integrator. We are not only an AWS Premier partner, but we also integrate these third-party tools and and also provide you the professional services to help you design, build, migrate, and run that infrastructure, that cyber infrastructure, that AWS infrastructure. We do everything soup to nuts. And we have individuals that are from the public trust all the way to the TSSCI classification level. So we're protecting data, and our systems are deployed across every single classification level in the US government.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I think that's it for questions. We have 15 seconds left. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.